My name is Stephen Galbraith, and I'm curator of the Cary Graphic Arts Collection at RIT. And I first want to thank everyone at A-Type I for the opportunity to participate in this conference and to present you all with a virtual tour of our library. Please consider this tour today an open invitation to visit and use our library in person, or to use our online digital collections, which Shani will be showing you in a moment, or perhaps even to apply for our annual Summer Research Fellowship, and that's described on our website. So if you go to cary.rit.edu and you click on the menu for research and then choose Summer Research Fellowship from our menu, you can learn more about this opportunity. The fellowship provides funding for a month of focused study here in the Cary collection. By way of a brief overview, RIT's Cary Graphic Arts Collection is one of the world's premier special collection libraries on graphic communication history and practices. Our library grew out of RIT's School of Printing. Therefore, printing history and related fields such as typography and type design are at the heart of our collections. Our library was founded in 1969 with an initial donation of about 2,300 books that had once belonged to our library's namesake, Melbert B. Cary Jr. Melbert B. Cary Jr. was director of Continental Type Founders Association, an agency that imported metal printing type from Europe to America for sale to printers. He also ran his own private press called the Press of the Woolly Whale. And with this in mind, I want to share with you a book from our library that is very much at the heart of the Cary collection. From 1928 to 1941, guests visiting Cary's Press of the Woolly Whale in New York City recorded their names in a visitor's book, the book shown here. Looking at the opening page to the visitor's book, we see the first people to sign their names were type designer and printer Frederick Gowdy, one of the 4 times he signed the visitor's book, his wife and printing collaborator Bertha, famed type designer Bruce Rogers, Albert Schiller, who is known for his extraordinary printing using type ornaments, and finally graphic designer and illustrator Clarence Hornung. These individuals are followed in the visitor's book by a host of noted typographers, artists, printers, and collectors, most of whom are represented in the holdings of the Cary collection. For example, our library holds a rich collection of Gaudiana and collects the works of Bruce Rogers and Albert Schiller. And some of these collections even belong to Cary himself. Pages from the visitor's book reveal Cary's friendship as well as his sense of humor. 2 of the more whimsical entries are a drawing of the woolly whale being warned by the gypsy, although the whale doesn't really appear to be paying much attention. This drawing is by the illustrator Fritz Kradel, who Cary helped emigrate out of Germany in 1938. Farther along in the book, American illustrator Warren Chappell depicts the dramatic Dance of the 7 Whales. In many ways, the artists and designers captured in this visitor's book reflect the contents of the collection when our library first began in 1969 with the library of Melbert B. Cary Jr. Last year, the Cary collection celebrated its 50th anniversary. Over the course of 5 decades, our collection has grown in size and in scope as we have worked to support research and curricula here at RIT through access to primary resources. We now hold over 45,000 volumes and over 130 archival collections. Research areas represented in our library include the development of alphabets and writing systems, early book formats and manuscripts, calligraphy, the development of typefaces and their manufacturing technologies, papermaking, the history of printing and illustration processes, bookbinding, artist books, and mid-century graphic design. And here, I refer to a collection that's called the Graphic Design Archive, or GDA for short. And this collection in our library preserves the work of 45 significant American graphic designers active from the 1920s through the 1960s, as well as selected contemporary designers working in the modernist traditions. One way in which we are expanding our collection is to diversify our holdings to represent a more inclusive history of the graphic arts. Like many libraries, the Cary is rooted in European and American history, and we need to grow and diversify. By way of an example, I want to share with you a very recent acquisition. So recent, in fact, it has not yet been cataloged, and indeed, you are the first audience to see it. Shown here is a collection of 958 Japanese wooden punches from circa 1870. I will say first that we still need to dig deeper into our research on this acquisition. So far, initial research done by the bookseller we worked with has found that these punches relate to the technique of adapting the electrotype process for the manufacture of matrices for casting type. This technique was introduced into China in the mid-19th century by the Irish-American Presbyterian missionary printer William Gamble. As scholar K.T. Wu writes, the characters were first cut on close-grained, hard boxwood, from which wax impressions were made. The mold was next put into a depositing trough containing copper solution. When the copper deposit was thick enough, it was trimmed and fixed in a brass holder. After, the copper plates were sawed into square pieces, each containing a character. Matrices by the hundreds were produced. This process was a great improvement over the old one of making matrices from steel punches and cost only a fraction of the time and expense. And by the way, these images of the wooden punches were taken by our very talented photo graduate student, Jae-Jen Lin. I'm happy to present this new acquisition to this group today, knowing perhaps that some of you might be able to help us shed further light on these artifacts, and maybe perhaps we'll even come to study them in person. This acquisition suits the Cary Graphic Arts collection perfectly as we continue to expand our collections related to type design and printing. These are perhaps the two most represented areas of study in our library, as you will soon see as we continue our tour into the Cary collection. And with that in mind, I would like to turn things over to our Ismar David Visiting Assistant Curator, Shani Avni.
Thanks again, Steve. And I want to talk to you today about just one of our archival collections. This just one collection out of the 130 that we hold here. It was a very difficult choice to make. But I want to share with you the Herman Eilenberg papers. It's an archive of a very prolific and innovative type designer. Okay. So Eilenberg was born in Berlin in 1843. He received training in painting and drawing and expressed an interest in becoming an engraver of illustrations. At age 14, he started an apprenticeship at the Tronitz and Son type foundry in his hometown. Following that, he got a position as a coin and medal engraver in Dresden. And with a wish to become a punch cutter, he relocated to Prague to work for G. Haas and Sons foundry. He then traveled through Europe and worked for the Flinch foundry in Frankfurt, the Battenburg foundry in Paris, and the Haas foundry in Basel. And after his employment with these prestigious type foundries, Eilenberg was recruited by the American foundry McKellar, Smith & Jordan. And in 1866, he arrived in Philadelphia, where he lived until his death in 1905. And he also worked for the George Bruce Sun & Co. foundry in New York. By 1898, Eilenberg had drawn and cut about 80 typefaces of more than 300 sizes, including 31 borders. So altogether, he cut by his hand 32,000 punches. And for more than 3 decades, he worked for the McCullough Smith and Jordan Type Foundry, where he developed innovative typefaces, borders, and ornaments. And his design contributed largely to the population of the foundry, and were highly praised by printers of that time, who were in great need of striking and original typefaces for advertising. So this is also a time in which the number of ornamented American typefaces available in the market is increasing due to the introduction of new technologies such as the typecasting machine and electrotyping. And in many cases, these foundries did not credit the typeface designers. And so in 1896, William E. Loy, a San Francisco printing equipment salesman, realized that it was important to document the men in the background who created those typefaces. And he started writing a series of profiles on the type designers of his day for the Inline Printer magazine. And Eilenberg's profile was published in the 21st issue of that magazine. Sorry. So since that first article, several articles have been written on Eilenberg's work, but there is so much more to research and discover. So in the archive, this archive was preserved by his family, and it was gifted to the Cary in 1990. And the papers collection covers years 1803 through 1906, and it contains correspondence, photographs, type drawings, printed ephemera, and other documents relating to Eilenberg's career. The collection is organized in 3 series: personal papers, type drawing, and other papers. So we see here the series 1 that holds very few letters, and this might be due to the fact that Eilenberg used to cut up letters and other documents to use as drawing papers. So we have in this folder a lot of sketches that are a lot of papers, sorry, that has his sketches on one side, but other letters and printed matter on the other side. Series 2 contains 2 albums and several folders holding hundreds of pencil sketches and ink drawings of typefaces, borders, cartouches, all drawn on various papers and Bristol boards. Most of them are not dated, but likely were created for his American employers. So we are now scrolling together through one of those albums. Each of those albums have over 70 pages of hundreds of beautiful hand-drawn letters. And I think this is a great opportunity to get this rare insight into Eilenberg's work process and examine the fine details of his design. The third series contained miscellaneous printed material related to Eilenberg's fields, such as stationery, specimen sheets, lettering, photostats, drawings, ephemera, sheet music covers, and other publications. The kind of technologies that Eilenberg designed for made pirating his typefaces easier. And so many of his popular designs were stolen. And in order to prevent that, he registered his typefaces as patents with the US Patent Office. The Cary holds a separate collection of patent registrations drawing that has 8 of Eilenberg's patented typefaces. So this is another source of research as we learn of typefaces that were identified as Eilenberg's by examining the US Patent Office records. And we also have our digital collection, where we constantly upload high-resolution images from our archives. So you are more than invited to have a look at some of these items from the Eilenberg collection in very high resolution, and including these scrapbooks that we've seen earlier. They're available in their entirety, so you can just scroll through them and have a deeper look. In addition to our archival collection and our digital collection, we also hold a technology collection. And in it, we have several of the original Eilenberg metal fonts, such as Filigree from 1870 and Pheidian from 1878. So our collections provide endless opportunity for research and type design. And I'd like to share with you a very recent project by RIT student Noah Bryant. Noah earned his BFA in photography with focus on visual media very recently, just in May of 2020. And for his final project, he explored the basics of type design through research into Eilenberg's typefaces. So as you can see here, he typesets the metal type and prepared a specimen and digitized those printed specimens. He independently learned how to digitize them and use FontLab. And he completed 2 typefaces that you can explore for yourselves and even download for free on his website. So that was a small glimpse into our collections, and now I would like to hand it over to Amelia Hugel-Fontenelle, our associate curator and master printer, who's waiting for us in the Cary press room.
So welcome. Thank you so much for inviting us. My name is Amelia Fontenelle. I am the associate curator at the Cary Graphic Arts Collection here at Rochester Institute of Technology. I'm very lucky today to be standing in the Cary collection in our library in Rochester, New York, and I want to acknowledge the special help of our graduate assistant, J.G. Lang, who's going to be our cameraman today. So thanks to the presentations by both Shani Avni and Stephen Galbraith, my colleagues at the Cary collection, you get a grand idea for the broad scope and the breadth of the typographic collections at RIT. However, we wanted to finish our presentation today by showing a unique area of the Cary, and that is our technology collection of working vintage letterpress printing presses and thousands of fonts of metal and wood type. So I'm standing in our reading room right here, and this is where a lot of our books and archival collections are stored. But if you're going to follow me, we'll go right into the press room. All right. So let's see here. I'm just checking out how we are. So super. Welcome to the Cary Collection Technology Collection. This is an area where we hold 30 working printing presses, and they range in the kinds of styles of presses from a wooden common press to iron hand presses, like the one you see behind me, as well as platen presses and cylinder presses. And so, with all of these kinds of machines, we can tell a very comprehensive story about the whole arc of human innovation as it pertains to letterpress printing and, of course, printing with typographic artifacts like type. This is typically a very active room as we do a lot of different teaching exercises like workshops and demonstrations, not only for classes at RIT, but also for community groups from all over the place that come to use and visit our collections. We also do a fair amount of limited edition press work on our own, such as cards and posters and booklets. And this is all kind of rolled into my personal belief that we are preserving these industrial artifacts through their continued use. All right, so the collection that I would like to highlight today in regards to technology is one that's really important to the Cary collection. It was the first typographic collection that came to RIT in the 1960s, and it laid the foundation for the establishment later of the Cary collection. These are collections that have to do with the American type designer Frederick W. Goudy. Steve showed you his signature in one of the first slides there. Goudy lived from 1865 to 1947. He designed 120 typefaces for metal type composition. And he's considered one of the greatest influencers in American typography in the early 20th century. Now, Frederick Goudy, his collection that came to RIT in the 60s is comprised of so many different things, such as prints and actual drawings by Goudy himself, correspondence, and books. This is in particular an original drawing by Frederick Goudy that would have gone to make this little ex libris for his friend Howard Coggeshall. Now I'm standing here because the Cary collection's Goudy collection also includes metal type and printing presses. So this particular section is what we call the lost Goudy types, and they are metal type that was cast by Goudy himself. Now Frederick W. Goudy worked with big companies like Lanston, Monotype, and Linotype. However, late in his career, he really felt that he wanted to take control of all of the aspects of designing and casting and distributing his types, so to cut out the features that he would have had to do if he was partnering with a larger type foundry or company. So he established a foundry called the Village Press and Letter Foundry, and it was about an hour north of New York City. Unfortunately, I'd like to say that went on for his entire life, but his type foundry burned to the ground in 1939. So where I'm standing in what's known as the lost Goudy types is one of the largest collections of Goudy cast type that's in existence. Fortunately, even though the matrices and the equipment used to cast the type were destroyed, Goudy had a friend named Coggeshall who collected his type. And so some 80 drawers of Frederick Goudy types are preserved here at the Cary. Oops. What's really great is that in recent years, we've actually been sorting out this type and proofing it. So with detailed proofs like every single sort, we can do a character count in case we do need to print with it. Also, we can determine if there are damaged characters or if some characters are in a wrong type case. So again, I fully expect that this type to be usable in the next 50 years, even though it's been here at RIT for 50 years and counting. So today, we are actually going to do some printing using some of this type. So if you'll come over here, the piece in question is a galley of ampersands. So in 1936, Frederick Goudy contributed to a publication published by the New York City group called the Typophiles. And it was a collected work where everybody wrote about ampersands. Goudy actually did some research in his travels at libraries and museums around the world. He was really interested in the development of the ampersand throughout history. And he redrew a lot of these medieval ampersand versions from manuscripts that he had seen. Well, since he had his own type foundry, he could certainly replicate those in metal type as well. So he printed his entire contribution to this diggings from many ampersand hogs. And that's what we're seeing here. So original Gaudi cast type of this ampersand piece. We're going to print this today. However, I have to tell you that the Cary collection is 50 years old, and last year we celebrated our 50th anniversary, and I thought this ampersand piece would be perfect to do as a printed keepsake to mark that event. I didn't want to do a big edition, though, using the original type. I wanted to really safeguard that. However, I knew that I could take a really nice proof of that type, digitize it, and then print it using a modern magnesium plate for letterpress printing. And so that's what I did. So here's the proof, and we're going to walk over to the printing press that actually will print on today, which is a very special one. This is the actual printing press we'll be printing on. The special thing about this press is its provenance. This printing press was once owned by William Morris, the founder of the arts and crafts movement in England. This printing press was the one that actually printed William Morris's magnum opus known as the Kelmscott Chaucer, which was published in 1896. So this press has a lot of wonderful history about it, about the things it has printed. But this press also belonged to Frederick Gaudi because he was so enamored with William Morris's work. He actually, when the press came up for sale in the 1920s, he acquired it and imported it from England to the United States. And so this is a photograph of him printing on this very press. And he owned it for just a short time. And eventually it passed to our namesake at the Cary collection, Melvert B. Cary Jr., who you saw a picture of earlier on. So when you think of all the people that actually use this press to do beautiful work, we are very gifted in that we can make it available here at RIT. So this is what we'll be printing on today for our demonstration. As I open this press, I will show you what we have inside. And here is the actual magnesium reproduction plate that shows the ampersands, and then some type that was set from the lost Gaudi type collection. So as I move forward, I'm going to ink up our press here. And hopefully Frederick Gaudi and all the gods of typography will be smiling upon us when we actually pull our print. I'm loading the paper into the tympan of this printing press, closing the frisket, which will hold it on, closing it to the bed of the press, advancing the bed of the press underneath the platen, and then pulling the lever to make our impression. No pressure, right? Frederick Gaudi and William Morris printed on this press. No pressure to make it good. So you'll come in close here. You can see that I think we got a pretty good impression here. So let me pull it out of the press. And our ampersands, a little bit light in some places, but not too bad. Our ampersands are looking as fresh as Gaudi cast them in 1936. So that is what I have prepared here for our end of the Cary collection. I'm so willing to take some questions, and I'm sure Shani and Stephen are as well. We'd love to have you visit us either online or in person, so don't forget about some of those resources that I put in the chat there. Please stay connected. So I'll just keep printing if somebody else wants to feed questions through the chat. So it looks like there's a lot of questions in the question mark. I don't know if anybody is monitoring that. So Steve and Shani, do you see there's a bunch of questions? If you could feed them to me, I can't really read them while I'm printing.
Well, we've just had one come in.
Okay, cool.
It begins icebreaker. What's the oldest printing press in this collection?
It's the Acorn, right, Steve?
I believe it is. We have a few from the early part of the 19th century, it's hard to date precisely, but we have one Acorn style press that was donated about 5 years ago. And it's interesting because it has no markings on it. So we've had to do some research to try to trace its provenance, but it might date back as early as the 1820s. Okay, Amelia, we've got a new one in.
Yeah.
How do you print books with this type of press?
That's such a great question. How do we print books? So it all has to do with how you would impose the actual books in terms of the typesetting. So this particular press, when it printed what was known as the Kelmscott Chaucer, and I'm actually going to take you to a painting here. This is supposed to be a painting of William Morris with his team that was working in the Kelmscott Chaucer. You can see that they're handling sheets there, and one side of the sheet is printed. So the way that this press was set up at that time is that it was set up to print what was called a folio size, and you would actually only on one side of the sheet get 2 pages, and on the other side of the sheet get 2 pages. So that setup is called the imposition of the pages. Now we have a lot of software that takes care of that. So let me bring you to the bed of the press. If we were going to print that same way that William Morris was set up for the Kelmscott Chaucer, we have half of the sheet set up here and half of the sheet set up there. And then you'd print on the second side and then fold that, and that would go into the book. If we were going to print a book that had 8 sheets or something in octavo, we would actually have 8 different imposed page layouts on this, and then the sheet would be folded up. So it has to do with that. You can totally print a book. It's just you have to know that you are going to have typeset for every single page of the book. You'll have to print all those pages and then change and print on the second side of that sheet, and then collate all that material so that you can make a book. It's a big process, but it can be done. And frankly, we all know it can because we have the records here in the Cary collection of this amazing scope of book work throughout history.
Wonderful. We have a couple more questions, Amelia. The first one, I'll just answer. It says, are you guys open for visitations or tours during the pandemic? This is from someone who lives within a couple hours drive. Yes, we are accommodating researchers and visits by appointment. It'll probably be on a break until after November because we've had an increase locally with some cases. They've asked us to not have visitors in, but we have been accommodating visitors through the fall semester. It's just been the last week or so. So if you reach out to us in about a week or two, we should be able to be accommodating visitors again. And then there's one, this is a good one, Amelia. I think you'll like to answer this one. Asking, does Steve Matson study there when he's working on his Gaudi collections?
Absolutely. And so Steve Madison, who is, I think, the type director at Monotype Imaging, he is an RIT alum. So he studied printing technology and typography here at RIT. So he comes back regularly, and we have actually done that same kind of proofing of the lost Gaudi types for his purposes in digitizing them. So that's an area that I think all of us have kind of touched on, that a lot of times when we work with type designers, we're providing you the raw material of the original print for whatever typeface, or pulling a new print of an older typeface in metal, and then that is kind of your source material for doing a revival. I worked recently with Carl Crossgrove from Monotype to provide some reproductions of the types from, oh, it's escaping me now. Oh my goodness, a German type counter, Wallbaum. So original Wallbaum. And that made into a big superfamily of Wallbaum revival. So yes, we do see Steve Madison.
Wonderful. I'm happy for that question, Amelia, because that's type revivals is one of the real active ways that this collection's used. So that was a wonderful question. And we have another one here. It's about the press you're working on, Amelia.
Yeah.
So on this particular press, one can print spreads as 2-ups.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or it depends on that imposition. We could get, I think, let's see, we could probably get 8-up, or depending on a very small size, we could probably even get 16-up, you know, if your line lengths were very small. So yes, this was a very large size press for 1891. And the reason why it could be large sized is because the platen was made out of cast iron rather than wood. So you could effectively increase the addressability or the printable area of a printing press made out of cast iron. So it's a very effective, it was a great milestone in printing history when printing presses were made primarily out of cast iron rather than ones made out of mostly wood, which had a much smaller addressable or printable area.
Shani, I don't know if you saw the last questions right up your alley.
Yes, so I'm just putting in the chat the link to our digital collection. So the items that we have scanned and are free for you to browse in very high resolution. This collection is constantly growing, so it's good to check up and see if we have any more items. Other than that, yeah, well, you'll have to come over and have a look at the collection in person.
I'd love to hear more thoughts about the Japanese punches from the group who is attending today. It's one of our latest acquisitions, and it's a singular one from us, for us. So if there's anybody who has any information about it, we'd love to hear.
And maybe, Amelia, I didn't mention this in my part when I was discussing those punches, but you noticed a few interesting things about them. Do you want to share?
Well, the curious thing that I found about them is that they were type high, and they were Anglo-American type high, so that's 0.918 inches. So for a piece of wood type that did not even need to be that height, it was curious to me to see that they were carved to that height, and I think it has to do with the British missionary who worked on the way to cast Japanese and Asian characters. So that was an interesting thing. A few of them were carved on both sides so they could reuse them. And a few had a couple Latin characters in them, like a trademark. So it's a really interesting collection. I can't wait to dig into it a little bit more.
So we have a question about that. How many characters are included in the recent Japanese acquisition? And
you have that data, right?
I do. Let me just return because I won't remember offhand.
From the
Yeah, there were the number
Wheeler.
of punches. So and because maybe there's some on either side, is 958. Now, the other interesting thing that we learned about William Gamble, the person who came up with this technique that might be demonstrated through this acquisition, is that he also worked to try to come up with the minimum amount of characters that could be used effectively in those languages, because that's really the crux of the challenge of creating so many type matrices that you could cast so many characters. So in addition to trying to come up with a way of mass producing the matrices, he was also working to kind of narrow the character set down. But it's still, I think he narrowed it down to something in like 5,000. I don't have the number with me. But another interesting part of that history. And again, it's very new to our collection, and it's a part of printing history that we're unfamiliar with, and we're very excited to learn more about it. And again, it's one of the reasons why we included it today. Kind of shows the kind of things we're collecting, but also because we are joined by so many of you who are rich in the history of type design.
There's a question regarding Eilenberg.
Is it another one or the one that we've...
I think it's the same one about how to access them online.
All right.
Well, there aren't any questions right now. And one thing I thought I might ask Amelia and really mention about the acquisition of the Kelmscott-Gowdy Press that she's working on. Amelia did a pretty amazing thing over the course of 9 months. She really was the principal person restoring that press and documenting every step of the way and getting it in working order. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that process. Oh, and also tell us, because someone's asking, how many ampersand posters will you print? She could watch all day.
I'm not sure. I mean, I can keep going. So this particular printing press came up at auction in 2013. And it was a press that we always knew we wanted here in the Cary collection because William Morris owned it, Frederick Gowdy owned it, and Melbert Cary, our namesake, owned it. So we thought that it should join his library. Also, it was significant because the founder of the American Printing History Association, his name was Lieberman, he also owned this printing press. So this press has seen a lot of really wonderful action throughout its life, 130 years now. So it came up for auction, and when I first saw it at auction in the pictures from Christie's, I said to Steve, "Oh, this is great. It's going to be an easy press to make operational." Well, when we received it in January 2014, it was all disassembled, and it was in pieces. And that was actually a big gift because with this disassembly, for instance, this whole bed was off. The platen was removed. The rails underneath that supported it, that was also taken off. We could see that it actually had a lot of rust, had a lot of little mechanical things that needed to be corrected in order for it to last another 130 years. So, for instance, this complete part here and all of the lever, the bar, these are all completely rusted. So I spent a significant amount of time removing the rust and repainting certain parts of it. We also discovered that certain parts were missing. So, and people, since it hadn't been used for printing in a long time, they didn't really notice. one of the parts that would be missing was, you can see there's a small little piece here that holds, it's a pressure wedge that holds this. And it was just, there was a piece of wood jammed in there. That doesn't hold something that's about 400 pounds. So luckily for us, we have a wonderful mechanical engineering department here at RIT. So I worked with the engineers to have pieces measured and remade so that it was in perfect working order by the time we opened up in October 2014 and made this press operational. And since then, we've enjoyed a few artists in residencies of people who are printing on this press. And we do our own edition and teaching on it. We always want it to be something that is operational. And not so much in the way, you know, a lot of people say, well, when are you going to print William Morris prints on there? And I say, William Morris, he had his own time. This press is now 21st century press, so I welcome a lot of really interesting creative work happening on it, not stuff that just calls back to the 19th century. I don't know how many of these posters I'll do, so I'll tell you that if I get going, and usually printing on a hand press is a two-person job. If I get going myself, I could probably get about 25 to 30 out in an hour. And it's a little bit more if I have two people working together to print. Probably about 40 an hour.
So I guess it's a good thing that that we're wrapping up now.
Yep.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.